of the manifesto demands, as well as overall engagement of young women within the decade of action. Nala Feminist Collective is a Pan-African group of 17 feminists with a mission to foster, enable, and mobilize young women from African diaspora, while bridging the gap between policy and implementation, intergovernmental and grassroots, as well as generational spaces. Nala is indeed guided by the African Young Women Beijing 25 Manifesto, targeting the political, digital, and offline spaces, and its areas of work are namely advocacy, research, and fellowship. Among our governance structure, to attain and achieve these objectives, Nala is composed of the Nala Young Women Council, chaired by Ms. Eya Shebi, and currently composed of Her Excellency Filsan Abdullahi, Minister of Women, Children and Youth of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, Honorable Emma Theophilus, Deputy Minister of Communication, Information and Technology of the Republic of Namibia, Ms. Aisata Kamara, co-founder of There Is No Limit Foundation, Ms. Borolo J. Kenewendo, former Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry of the Republic of Botswana, Ms. Natasha Wang Mwansa, child journalist from the Zambia, Ms. Jaha Dukure, UN Women Goodwill Ambassador for Africa and Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Ms. Yasmin Abdelmajid, media anchor and writer from Sudan, Oluwaseun Adoyejo Sowobi, Executive Director of Stand to End Rape from Nigeria, Ms. Emital Mahmoud, UNHSR Goodwill Ambassador, Ms. Rosebel Kagumire, feminist writer from Uganda, and Ms. Rose Wachuka, Policy Advisor and Chief of Staff of the Minister of Culture, Sports and Heritage of the Republic of Kenya. There's an exciting road ahead of us as we move towards the Generation Equality Forum in Paris through the decade of action. In this regard, to make sure you do not miss any update from us, please follow our social media channels on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as take a look at our website, www.nalafem.org. Without any further delay, I would like to request my colleagues to stream the 10 demands of the African Young Women Beijing 25 Manifesto video. Thank you very much to my colleagues and to all our participants. Head to www.nalafem.org to read the manifesto and to endorse it through your signature. I am now very excited to introduce our guest speakers, and I really look forward to hearing their valuable insights. The structure of today's conversation is as follows. We have with us 3 incredible African young women who have contributed to the development of the manifesto and highly supported in hosting the regional barazas. I will be asking each of them one question, and after we will be moving into the Q&A session. As a matter of introduction, today we have Ms. Caryn Dasah, member of the Gender is My Agenda campaign youth network. We have Ms. Lorato Modongo, member of the African Women Leadership Network Young Women Caucus. Welcome, Lorato. And Ms. Anika Dorothy, member of the Global Generation Equality Youth Task Force and East African coordinator of Amplify Girls. Welcome, Anika, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining the conversation. So let me start with you, Caryn. First of all, welcome and thank you for joining us. Here's my question for you. The Gender is My Agenda Youth Network has co-hosted the West Africa Beijing 25 Regional Baraza as member of the steering committee. Considering your participation, why do you think it was relevant to mobilize towards the manifesto? And to which extent do you think this manifesto reflects the most modern and pressing issues affecting African young women? Caryn, the floor is yours, and please introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Sodfa. I'm unable to turn on my video. I hope it's still fine to talk without being seen. Caryn Dasah is my name. I'm an activist from Cameroon. A member also of the Beijing Youth Task Force and the Central African Region Chair of the Gender is My Agenda Youth Network. I am the General Coordinator of the Cameroon Women's Peace Movement. I'm passionate about peace building, and I am happy to be part of this meeting of today. Dear African youth, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon, and I'm happy to have you all here. And this is based on a project that we all started months ago. And our reason was and is still remains the same. We want to ensure that young African women find their space. And that is very important because if we do not find our space, we will be taking off spaces. Hi, Sodfa, can I just continue the presentation?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Gender is My Agenda Network is a Pan-African women's network made up of civil society and young women with Ms. Caryn Dasah as the chair. And GMAC has been involved in ensuring and working towards gender justice, young women representation, both in political and in political spaces in Africa and global spaces. It is important to bring the young women perspective. Generation equality has come. How do we keep the momentum? How do we keep the spirit of generation equality? So with Nala, we're able to come up with the African Women Manifesto to bring the young women perspective to generation equality. We looked at the importance to hear from young women and get their dire needs. We don't want to sit in spaces and assume that this is what the young women of Africa are saying. This is what we want. It is important for us to make our demands, which we did through the manifesto. Consultations were done regionally. We met so many groups of young women in all their diversity to work on this document, to come up with the manifesto and the demands that we have today. We're calling on stakeholders to consider this manifesto and these demands as a cry of young women from Africa and take bold steps and actions and not just make commitments, but with lip commitment, but take commitment and engagement to ensure that these demands are met. We want to ensure young women are represented actively and not in the spirit of tokenism, the way things have been going on for a very long time. We hear issues of, oh, the young people were consulted. How many young people were consulted? Nala made this possible because we consulted and spoke with, despite the barrier of COVID-19, we used virtual platforms to organize these meetings and ensure that the voices of these young women from Africa are heard, and not just having a selected elitist youth, but ensuring that young people in all their diversities were consulted when we were doing this consultation. I will reiterate, as Sodfa already read out the demands. We want to ensure that economic justice for young women in Africa. We want to see an end to discrimination, and not just say, oh, end discrimination, and year after year, the same occurrences. We still have young women who are being discriminated, whose bosses want to sleep with them for them to get promotion, who are still being, their bodies are still being used as weapons of wars. We want to get to the moment when this will stop and perpetrators of such acts are brought to justice. We want to ensure that African women raising their voices and bringing in their perspective. We have a challenge. When there are global platforms like this, we have a lot of numbers. People are coming in their different numbers. And I want to tell you that sometimes for us to access such meeting and spaces, it is a difficulty. We have our own lived reality. We have our own perspective, and that is what we are bringing to the table. That is what we want. That is what we want lawmakers to take into account, the role and the demands of the young women from Africa. Working through in this project, it didn't only teach me a lot, but I had to interact with young women from all over Africa. And I remain very grateful for these. And my one demand is, this should not be, these demands that we are tabling today. Gender equality, Mexico passed. We're looking forward to France. We want to ensure that young women of Africa find our spaces, not just having a few number and trying to say, oh, these are the young people of Africa, but we want to be represented in all our diversities. And we hope that the African Union and all relevant stakeholders and governments will commit to ensuring that these demands are met. Thank you very much so far.
Thank you very much, Caryn, for the valuable contribution. And we remain grateful to the Gender is My Agenda campaign and its youth network as we look forward to working together towards Generation Equality Forum in Paris and beyond. And I hear you clearly. The spirit of the Generation Equality Forum through the Manifesto, and it is important to make our demands, and we call on stakeholders to take bold steps and actions, and not just commitments, but take engagement to ensure that these demands are met. Hence, to our participants here on Zoom and Facebook, please let us know if you have signed the African Young Women Beijing 25 Manifesto. To our participants on Zoom, please raise your hand by using the Zoom feature. We are very curious. And while you do that, let me give the floor to Lorato. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Here's the question. African Women Leadership Network Young Women Caucus has co-hosted the Central Africa Regional Baraza in October 2020. What are the challenges young women shared there? And what do you think are among the 10 demands raised in the region? So Lorato, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Sodfa. And unfortunately, I'm not able to switch on my video because it affects the internet connection. But I hope that I'm audible and all the attendees here can hear me. My name is Lorato, as you said, and I'm from Botswana. And I'm part of the AULIN, which is the African Women Leadership Network Young Women's Caucus. And I'm a psychologist by profession. You are actually right, Sodfa, that the AULIN Young Women Caucus co-hosted, or rather co-steered, the baraza that was held in the Central African region, because there were 5 barazas across the region, and we were tasked with working with young women on youth-led civil societies in the Central Africa region. And I'm going to dive right into your question, to engage in your question, that what are some of the issues, the pertinent and topical issues that were brought forward by young women there, and what is the linkages to the demands that are captured in the manifesto. So firstly, Sodfa and everybody who's listening, like I said, I'm not able to switch on my video because of the internet connection. It will be disturbed, and you find that that is actually a lamentation by almost all young people in Africa. They're always lamenting about internet access and network access. And it was one of the issues that came up from the Central Africa Baraza, that there is no digital justice, right? We are finding that the democratization of digital spaces is a problem. And currently, when we're talking social media, we're talking digital spaces and the amount of work that can happen there. For example, when we're talking youth participation, young people being able to mobilize and young people being able to organize and access information in digital spaces, then if we're still lamenting internet and connectivity issues, then it means that somehow, as generation equality, our access, our participation is limited in these virtual spaces that can actually be able to capture our real life day-to-day problems as we navigate life as young African women. So this was one of the issues raised, and I'm only bringing it in because it ties in with a problem that I'm actually experiencing right now. So I thought that it would be very, very instrumental and beneficial to start with that point. Secondly, the second issue that came out was that leadership. Young people in Central Africa were lamenting leadership in the baraza that we hosted, but that also ties in with what other young women in Africa were lamenting about. That leadership is still very underpinned in patriarchal ideologies. And what do those look like? They look like a very sexist type of leadership, where is male domination, male being in the upper echelons of power. And we're also seeing ageism come through there, that the older you are, the more you are thought to be having the capacity and experience to lead, when in actual fact, we are not seeing any progress and we're not seeing any results from people who are actually older and doing the leading and saying we want space in the leadership spaces. And then also this leadership that's rooted in patriarchal underpinnings, we are seeing that it's very bureaucratic with a lot of bottlenecks on the way, thereby ensuring that young people, young women in particular, are not able to participate. So young women in Central Africa were lamenting that, and that aligns with one of the manifesto demands, which is we want intergenerational core leadership. So they were articulating and explicitly saying that we want core intergenerational core leadership, which looks like producing or co-curating and co-creating and co-production of policies. If we're talking policies that are going to be affecting the lives of young women in the continent and in the Central African region, then you need to have the same people in which that policy affects to be able to co-curate that knowledge and those policies and legislature etc. And then we were seeing also young women saying that they want to be able to be selected in things like advisory councils, right? Things like task forces. And we're seeing that in COVID-19, when it started, a lot of countries were coming up with COVID-19 task forces, but we were seeing that the task forces were taking the very same shape that the general leadership space in the continent takes. It was old men, who were, they were old, they were men, largely, still bottlenecks, still bureaucratic, and with young women not having participation there. So those are just some of the examples in which we can intensify young women leadership in the continent, and specifically as was articulated in the region. And then even when we're talking political leadership, we're seeing that there was also that lamentation that women are not having spaces to participate in political leadership. And how can partisan politics help? They can help in that there can be introduction of affirmative action, including quotas. If it means that partisan politics are deliberate and say we're going to have at least five young women running for political office, then partisan politics should be very deliberate about that, and that should be reflected in their constitutions and their manifestos, which is what is lacking in the continent and specifically articulated in the Central Africa Baraza that we hosted. And then the third thing, the third demand, or some of the thematic area which ties in with one of the demands, is that young women were in Central African Baraza were showing that they need protection from during armed conflict, right? There's armed conflict and occupation of territories, including natural disasters now, there's war, there's civil unrest, and we're seeing that there's lack of accountability, and that ties in with the second point that I had earlier made of leadership. If the leadership is weak, then how do we expect accountability when we are talking now about armed conflict, civil unrest, occupation of territories, and we see how those affect the lives of young women in that particular region, but across the entire continent as well. And we see that young women were saying they want the institutionalization of their participation in peace-building efforts and processes and mechanisms. And we're not seeing that. And like I have already mentioned, we're seeing that leadership remains underpinned in patriarchal ideologies. So even in processes, mediation, and just the different mechanisms that exist for peace-building efforts, the same shape is still maintained, meaning that the larger thematic or umbrella thematic area, once again, is the leadership, which is largely patriarchal. And I think, because I'm not going to be able to touch on all the points in the interest of time. And the last one that was really articulated, and once again, it's in the manifesto. It was also it's a sentiment shared by other young women through the other the barazas that we hosted, was that gendered violence is a problem. Is a problem in that when we're talking armed conflict, when we're talking occupation of territories, we're seeing that it also manifests in young women, children, adolescents, and young boys being violated, right? We are seeing that high rape cases registered, those documented, but we're not talking about those which are not documented, because reported cases are not a true reflection of what is happening on the ground. We found that there are other cases that are not documented, but we're also seeing intimate femicide that is happening in the region and across the continent, and FGM, as well as alien forced marriages. So you find children as young as 10 years old who still have a very bright future ahead of them, who need to be accessing quality education, by the way, not be able to access that, but rather fulfilling wifely duties, because the society believed that it was okay for a 10-year-old child to be a wife to some 70-year-old men, thereby robbing them of a future ahead of them. And we are seeing that in conflict settings, this is actually crystallized and actually just, hyper visibilized, and it happens at a very large scale that young women in the Central Africa were lamenting about. And as part of this 10 manifesto demands, they were saying we need for gendered violence in all of its forms, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional, economic, to actually be criminalized, and we want legislatures and policies and bills and laws to be enforced in order to completely do away with gendered violence. Because not only is it a public health issue, it's also an economical issue, it's a legal issue, and it's a psychological issue. But we're also seeing that they're saying when we talk gendered violence, we're not only talking about heteronormativity, we're also talking about the LGBTQI communities and other communities that we need to know that the violation towards those other community is a part of a gendered violence. So those are just some of the issues that came out, Nala. Sodfa, that came out, and I tried to just, put them in thematic areas and try to align them with some of the manifesto demands that we see in the document. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorato, for the elaborate response. You have beautifully summarized the content and discussion during the Central Africa Youth Baraza, and we are excited for the work of the African Women Leadership Network, including the contribution and impact of the Young Women Caucus, and we really look forward to further collaboration. I hear you clearly. There is no digital justice. The democratization of digital space is a problem. And this remains relevant as we head towards Paris. And how do we make sure we leave no one behind? And we are also curious to hear from our participants, so please feel free to provide your inputs in the chat. I also hear clearly that leadership is linked to patriarchal ideology, and we have the issue of ageism. And as a solution, participants during the Baraza have raised intergenerational co-leadership. And it is part of our mission as Nala to bridge the gap between grassroots and intergovernmental, as we truly believe that intergenerational co-leadership is an organic solution. And commonly, gender-based violence was highly raised in all Barazas. We argue that COVID-19 has further exacerbated the vulnerability of women and girls and other communities, as you have mentioned, with school closure, a rise of harmful practices, among others. And it is time to demand clearly the safety and protection of all communities, including in conflict settings. So thank you very much, Lorato. And last but not least, we have with us Anika. So welcome, and here is the question for you. The Generation Equality Forum Youth Task Force has co-hosted the Africa Young Women Regional Barazas as member of the steering committee. And actually, you were the only member hosting all Barazas, considering your large membership. Considering the role of the task force is playing in amplifying youth voices and participation in the Generation Equality Forum and within the action coalitions, how do you think the manifesto should be mainstreamed, and what's the role of youth and women organizations in amplifying it? So welcome, Anika. Please introduce yourself to our participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sodfa, for that question. My name is Anika Dorothy, and as Sodfa has explained, I am part of the Generation Equality Global Youth Task Force. I am currently representing the task force on the Generation Equality Core Group, and we are leading youth engagement in the Generation Equality Forum, heading up to Paris, as we have already done Mexico. The Africa Young Women Manifesto is indeed a very important document that needs to be disseminated further and wider. What the task force is doing, because the Generation Equality Forum is a space where there is the amalgamation of governments, of stakeholders, civil society, and youth-led organizations. And so what it hopes to achieve is, of course, a momentous renewal of the Beijing plus 25 platform for action that was launched in 1995. What the task force is doing currently is to mainstream the youth voice. And moving on to Paris, there are concrete things we have asked for in the Paris Forum. These are like the creation of a youth stage. This is like having the 44 civil society events have a reserve for youth where we can also partake in the selection of youth events to ensure that grassroots youths are not left behind in the conversations, in the discussions, and in the mainstream agenda. We are also pushing to have youth speakers, and not only recommendations for civil society, but also for government. But not just picking a speaker. One thing that we are focused on is, in order to achieve intergenerational leadership, we must have youth representatives sitting at some of the highest level of government. A small example is in Kenya, where the president created a position called Chief Administrative Secretary in a ministry, which means that is the third most powerful person in a ministry. And this position has largely been reserved for youth, although it was recently declared unconstitutional. But youths are fighting for it because it means that in the event of a global platform, then one person from the ministry can, of course, be youth. So it's not just about intergenerational leadership, but what positions of government and of, economy are youth being accorded. Now, the Africa Young Women Manifesto has 10 major demands. And of those 10 major demands, a lot of them touch on the current issues of women. So the question is, how are we galvanizing as young women of Africa to ensure that the relevant authorities, philanthropists, funders, donors, and governments are listening to us? One thing the Africa constituency of the task force has done in Paris is to argue for communities, because it is in Africa that we have the biggest representation of community-driven organizations, of youth-led organizations from the grassroots. And so currently, with the Generation Equality Secretariat, we are formulating a targeted response or a targeted approach towards popularizing GEF in the grassroots of the Global South. And of course, through Nalafem, we welcome some concrete suggestions on how to actualize some of these engagements. Because one thing that is clear is that in every probably rural setting, not only rural, but even some modern grassroots setting, some people still don't know what generation equality is. Some people still don't know that there's a Paris Forum. And the biggest question, young people still don't know how to access the Paris Forum and how to access this action coalition framework that is going to be launched. It is still not clear for young people. So a major part of us as task force members is to demystify and to break it down, and not only break it down to the youth, but also push the Generation Equality Secretariat and Action Coalition leaders to ensure that they are creating avenues where youth can be involved. I know there's a lot of talk around resourcing, and we cannot talk about empowering youth without making deliberate steps to put money into the hands of young people. We have discussed this at length, and we have pushed to see that the resourcing that comes out of the Generation Equality Forum in Paris has quotas on youth engagement. And this will be done, and that is why each action coalition has a representation from a government, a funder, a philanthropist, a civil society, and a youth-led organization. So I think one call I would ask is that let us familiarize ourselves with all the action coalitions, the leaders and the structures, and all this information is found online on the Generation Equality Forum. But specifically for youth engagement, it is important that you look at the Generation Equality Youth Design Sprint. When you Google it, you'll just see it in that, the way it is typed, the Youth Design Journey for Generation Equality. And it has a monthly newsletter. It has all the information about youth engagement. And a major question is, how do young people ask for accountability on the Generation Equality Forum in their countries? Because the Generation Equality Forum is co-convened by Mexico, France, UN Women, civil society, and youth-led organizations, each UN Women country office is able to provide access, is able to provide information, and spearhead the processes of generation equality within each country. So your local UN Women office is a good place to start. And the manifesto, I just want to point out the education, the sector, the part of education in the Africa Young Women Manifesto. As we know, COVID has led to a lot of our sisters, our young girls being out of school, especially due to pregnancy. As much as there are other issues of economic finances, school closures, a lot of our girls have gotten pregnant, and we as a society have not done enough to support holistic re-entry of girls back to school. I would like to call upon everyone to re-examine what are the re-entry policies in each of our countries. And once we examine that, then we need to ask ourselves, can government alone be enough to achieve holistic re-entry? Because holistic re-entry takes care of the psychological damage, the justice for the survivors. It also takes care of the consistent school attendance and also the daycare for this child. These are conversations that we need to have. And most importantly, we need to have the conversation about women as agents of patriarchy, or who have gone through a system for so long and aid the narrative that discriminates girls who have gotten pregnant. We do understand that the overall narrative in our countries globally is that these girls must be supported. But what is happening on the ground? And this is what this manifesto also aims to change, part of it. Not only intergenerational dialogue, but ensuring that we create the foundation upon which these girls can be able to re-enter the economic space and, you know, the leadership space and the world at large. I see this because in the Africa Women's Manifesto, we need to be able to start changing the narrative. We need to be able to start telling the stories of girls, because some stories are used to dispossess, some stories are used to malign, but we can use the stories to empower and to humanize, to put a face to the African young girls, the African young women, and to ensure that we repair the dignity of our people through the stories. And that means being producers of our own knowledge. That is by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So thank you, Sodfa. I will return it back to you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Anika. Actually, we have our participants sharing questions. I know that you have to go as you have another engagement, but let me please raise it to you, as I believe you are the right guest speaker to respond to. Riviwani Sadiki shared many schools, girls have been impregnated and they are not going to school. What plans are to backstop on them? So what do you think will be a proper response, Anika?
I think the first thing we need to do is to recognize that we need to invest in community-driven organizations. Because most of the time, when a girl faces a rape or or gets pregnant, she's shunned by her family. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes her own mother is ashamed, or her father is ashamed. Her sisters and friends somehow step away from her. Teachers in our schools still don't know how to handle the re-entry of a pregnant girl. So the first thing I think that we need to do is not only have mapping of, you know, re-entry girls who've fallen out and stuff, but also create a synergy between the chief, the offices of the chief or administration and the community-driven organizations who are at the communities, who are following up on girls getting to school and who are also providing holistic re-entry options. And I think if we're able to create a coordinated response in that local setting, then we'll be able to actually get girls back to school. But we cannot do groundwork only. We must also ensure that we bring our governments on board to not only rewrite the re-entry policy for girls, but also create a manual for teachers and school heads to understand, how do we actualize re-entry? What happens when a girl steps back to school after a pregnancy? once we get this framework working, I think we can be able to manage to get a lot more girls back to school.
Thank you very much, Anika, for the comprehensive response and for the valuable work you are doing. We are impressed by the powerful influence and mobilization of the task force, and we wish to reiterate our support as we look forward to working together. Also, thank you so much for responding to the question from our participants. I hear you. The African Young Women Beijing 25 Manifesto is important and has to be disseminated widely. I also hear about the remarkable work of the task force in advocating and influencing for intergenerational co-leadership. I also hear and understand about the confusion and lack of clarity on how to access the Generation Equality Forum, and I understand that the entire task force is doing its best to make sure that young people are informed. And on this, major challenges remain, such as connectivity, as Lorato has mentioned it. And in this regard to our participants, please follow the work and activities of the task force, as they are leading a remarkable work to bridge between the Generation Equality Forum activities and the young people. So thank you very much, Caryn, Lorato, and Anika, for your valuable contributions and for kicking off our first engagement. And to our Francophone friends, please head to our social media channels, as we will be hosting an engagement in French next week. Our guest speakers were clear on how the manifesto incorporates the demands of young women and how powerful this political document is. It is then imperative that we galvanize the manifesto and we jointly demand for its mainstreaming in the different structures. We need a targeted approach to ensure that the voices of African young women are duly incorporated and listened to. We have launched the poll, and we are seeing that 46% of the participants that are here with us haven't signed yet the manifesto. Once again, please head to our website, www.nalafem.org, and endorse it. I hope that this conversation has clarified the purpose of the manifesto, what's the reasoning behind the manifesto, how the demands became a reality from our regional barazas, and what are our plans for this manifesto. So now it's your turn, dear participants. I am opening the Q&A session for the next 10 minutes, and I look forward to hearing your questions and reflections. So please feel free to raise your hand using the Zoom features. And in the meantime, my colleagues have also collected some of the questions which I might raise to our valuable speakers. So here there is actually an interesting question from Stan Monsho. How do we convince women not to be the ambassadors of some toxic and harmful cultural practices, such as female genital mutilation, that is done by women on women? I would like to know if Lorato is still with us. I feel that this could be a question that you can provide a response based also on the briefing you have provided.
Okay, yes, I'm very happy to give a response to that, Sodfa. They're actually right that some of these patriarchal and harmful practices are actually engineered and sustained by, women on younger women or on other women. And I want to just say, unfortunately, that is how most oppressive systems work. They need to take a part of the oppressed collective in order to maintain and encourage and sustain whatever it is the harmful act, right? On the rest of the oppressed peoples. I hope I make sense. So, for example, for patriarchy to sustain itself, it needs to utilize some women as its own agents. That's clear, right? So how do we break this? My answer would be very simple. How we can eliminate this is by eliminating the entire system in itself that demands this. But if we're going into practical solutions, I think that it's not an issue of this woman did that or this woman did not do this. It's an issue of seeing in the collective, in the society, what methodologies can we use. For example, the traditional leadership can be utilized in in ensuring that some of these harmful practices are stopped, we can utilize the education system in ensuring that some of these harmful practices are stopped. Because remember, those women that actually perpetuate those harmful practices also learn it socially, just as much as anybody else learns something socially. So they've been socialized to think that it's good for them, although and to say something is a patriarchal ideology does not mean that it is solely perpetrated by men. No, it is saying patriarchy recognizes the dominance and the power of men, but who perpetuates it, who sustains it, and who encourages it can be anyone in the society. I can be a woman but having patriarchal ideologies, or it can be a man with patriarchal ideologies. So the problem at hand is not the woman doing the actual cutting of somebody else. It's the actual patriarchal ideology that says that you need to be A, B, C, D in order to be seen as a worthy, valuable woman. So the short answer to it is that I think we need to dismantle the patriarchal system in its entirety, in its totality, and we can use all the other institutions, for example, the family, traditional leadership, the education system, to make people unlearn. I hope that's sufficient, but I would be happy if other panelists would want to give this answer a shot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorato. Indeed, Anika, before you disconnect, if you would like to add on the response of Lorato.
Lorato has actually put it very well, as I said earlier, and as the question has just come through, we need to start having a conversation about women as agents of patriarchy. We still have girls who are shunned by their own family members for who are women, and actually, as Lorato has put it well, education is not a factor of patriarchy. Just because someone, is well exposed doesn't mean they have been entrenched in patriarchy. One way of doing away with this system is by using the education system. Because currently we have brought up the boy child in patriarchy and the girl child in empowerment within the same household. We still have people who tell girls, pick your brother's plate and take it to the kitchen. And this creates and perpetuates a system of believing that men hold a superior position of power. And when a girl grows up knowing this, then it affects her agency or her power to say no in instances of sexual encounters, because they're taught to be silent, to follow, and they're taught that this other gender is an all-knowing, all-powerful, gender. And so if we can be able to have gender equality in our schools, because one thing that we need to accept, the train has left the station. Gender equality is here with us now. We cannot go back. But we are having our boys and our men not understanding the basic tenets of gender equality, because in some instances, no one has actually communicated this to them or even taught them. And in the words of Prince Harry, actually, if we must achieve gender equality, then it cannot be women alone who speak up for women and girls. We must do this together and collectively. So that would be my addition.
Thank you very much, Anika. And I think this responds clearly to another question, which is, Sodfa, how can men for women support the localization of the manifesto? And we argue that men remain our key ally in the achievement of gender equality. Beyond endorsing the manifesto, we request to our ally to disseminate it at a smaller and larger scale from the community and beyond. And as Lorato and Anika have rightly pointed out, we have a duty in informing both women and men to dismantle structural patriarchy. Also believe that men set the example to influence and inform their fellow. We believe in your contribution to uplift women's demands and voices. I'm also seeing another question coming from Patrick, who has mentioned, among other things, beyond the endorsement of the manifesto, other areas, including unequal ecological exchange and climate catastrophe, labor market requirements, and reduce foreigner debt. In regard to ecological exchange and climate catastrophe, we have hosted specific and targeted conversation on climate justice during our barazas, and we are confident that now, as we further galvanize on the manifesto, we will be endorsing and amplifying the voices of multiple advocates working on gender justice. And we believe that we all have a duty on that, as we understand how climate change is negatively impacting women and girls and other communities around the continent. I would like to take the very last question, and then we can wrap up for today. We are cognizant about the time, but please rest assured we will have other engagements. The last question, let me pick something here. Okay, what can we do to parents who force their children into very difficult situation because of poverty? We have defined economic justice demand, but maybe in 1 minute. It could be that Lorato is not with us, or she's facing internet challenges. As
Sodfa,
she has.
Sodfa?
Oh, you can hear us.
Hey.
Great. Hi, Lorato. Yes.
Hi. You cut there a little bit. May you kindly repeat that?
Sure. Yes, we have another question, which is about what can we do to parents who force their children into very difficult situation because of poverty?
Okay, it's a little bit difficult because we are seeing that poverty in Africa, research is showing that it has a woman's face, by the way, and poverty is one of the backbones of unequal societies. And we are also seeing that in our manifesto, this is one of the demands that young women are demanding for economic justice. And how does that economic justice look alike? It looks like enforcing rights and dignity for young women in different sectors, and just understanding that poverty can really just can take away the dignity, which is what the question is speaking to, that what do we do? I think one of the ways in which we can do that is through education. Again, and education not just institutionally in schools or education, but it could be education once again in the community through our traditional leadership, through our own leadership in terms of policies, but also just ensuring that women in vulnerable sectors, for example, care work, cleaning work, the hospital industries, and all of that, they are remunerated fairly, so that we can eliminate that poverty having the face of a woman, right? Then that way, if more families in Africa are women-led, and we are then remunerating women for their work, then it means that most families will be coming out of poverty now and consequently in the future, therefore eliminating some of these issues. And then I think it's also up to the leadership of different countries to increase things like minimum wage, so that people don't find themselves in poverty now and in the future, so that some of these byproducts of poverty as issues are eliminated. And I guess it's also the role of other custodians of children in the society, because, you know, I don't know if other African countries have this, but we have an adage that says that a child is not their parents' child alone. They are the entire community's child, right? So that means the teachers, the public health system, the legal system, the police officers, and everybody else, then they must collectively find ways in which children will be protected from such harmful acts.
Thank you, Lorato, for the response. I'm seeing other questions and the need in keeping the discussion and the conversation about the demands and the most pressing issues affecting women and girls in the continent. This is not the last engagement and the conversation is not done. So we warmly invite you to keep the conversation alive on our social media channels. Thank you very much for joining our first V-engagement, and we look forward to having you in our forthcoming activities. Our gratitude goes as well to those who are watching this streaming on Facebook. Thank you. Not to miss any of our engagement and activities, please follow our social media channels and head to our website, www.nalafem.org. This is our manifesto, and we look forward to working with all of you to ensure these demands are streamed and amplified. I wish you a wonderful day, and please take care and be safe. It was a pleasure hosting this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sodfa.
Thank you very much, Lorato, for joining us.